Hello, this is Fly Little Birds. My name is Nairi. I've got 2 adopted sons and I've also been a foster carer. I share about childhood trauma and tips and advice around adoption and fostering. Please subscribe if that's interesting to you. Now today we're going to look at an older child, so not under 5 years but from 5 plus, not into teenage years, but if you're going to be fostering or adopting a child around sort of the ages of around about 5 to 11, then this video is going to be really useful for you as I give you some tips. So the first point to make is they may have had lots of moves already. So if they're a little bit older and you're fostering or adopting them, they may have had more than one placement. Now this in itself causes issues and anxieties because the child might feel that they're going to actually be moved on again, and therefore they are not really willing to commit to you or build up that trust level. And that can be the same for adoption as well. And so you're going to have to work really hard to build up that attachment. And because they're going to be verbal, you can have conversations around it. You will need to have some conversations around why those placements have been shorter, why they haven't stayed with a particular foster parent, why they have moved on for adoption, and things like that. You're going to have those conversations with them. There is a video on my channel actually, which I'll link at the end, about how to explain family in its wider context, and you can use dolls and things to set up different family groups to show them the difference between a birth family, a foster family, and adoptive family. It can be really, really confusing for children, even though it's not for us. So it is worth using 3D physical objects to explain family to them. The second thing that I want to say is they will have a massive transition because they're likely to be moving into school if they're kind of moving from preschool, nursery into school age. But not only that, they may well be going to a different environment and a different school. So if they're not in school yet, they'll be moving to school and having that huge transition into starting school. If they're already in school and you're adopting them in your out of area, then they're going to have a whole new school and a whole new area. Now we're asking children to almost completely start their lives all over again in that situation, and so it is a troubled time for them. There's a lot of unrest for them. They don't know what to expect when they get at the other end. You know your environment, you know you're going to place them in a school that they're going to be relatively happy in. You've done all the research, but the child has no concept of what this place is going to look like. A child that's in nursery or preschool has no concept of what school really means. I mean, in the UK it means wearing a funny uniform and sitting around a lot, you know, being talked to. So you've got some work to do here, and I really suggest a really good way of getting around this is to make your own books around the environments that they're going to be going into. So just imagine an A4 book with lots of sheets of paper in, where you start collating pictures of where they're going to be living. And you'll be asked to do this as an adopter anyway, but I think go a little bit deeper. Where they're going to be living, what their school looks like, what classrooms look like, where everything is locally if you're moving area. Build up your own books of resources that they can flick through, and you can have conversations with them around this, because the positive side of adopting a child this old is actually you can have conversation with them. However limited that might be, you can actually explain stuff and they can ask questions back. And so start to think about what questions you think your fostered or adopted child is going to start asking you, and start thinking about what your answers might be. Simple answers that they can understand and they can grasp. The next thing that you and they are going to have to navigate is how much you say about the fact that they may be adopted or fostered. So children will come into school. Thus, imagine that you're a new adopter and you have suddenly a 5-year-old and you didn't have any children before, and you suddenly turn up at school. Well, if it's the beginning of school, no one's going to ask questions because everybody's turning up. But if it's partway through a year or it's in another year group, it's going to be obvious to some people that you haven't actually given birth to this child. So it's really worth thinking about that narrative now. How much are you comfortable to tell people? When you go to celebrations, whether it be birthday parties or you meet up with parents, how much do you want to say? I think it's really important that you have that narrative ready to go. However, sometimes we can be a little bit overprotective about the child's history, and I don't mean the detail of what they've gone through, but about sharing about the fact they're adopted or fostered. And for children, sometimes it can be a little bit of a weight off their mind that you do discuss these things, because then they don't have to broach all that information with teachers and friends and parents themselves, because you are sharing the load with them. For us, we've had a mixed response to this with our boys. Sometimes they want us to let on that they're adopted and they're proud of it and they want to tell all their friends. Other Other times they want to keep it a little bit secret and be like everybody else. So if I'm honest, over the years, our sons now are 12 and 13, we've had a kind of wave effect where sometimes they want it shared and sometimes they don't want it shared. So I guess the important thing is to check out with your child if they want it shared, but also to give them permission to share that they're fostered or adopted with whoever they want to, and for them to be proud of it. But as I say, you can discuss with them as well what their narrative is going to be. You can discuss with them who and what friends they will like to discuss this with and share this with. There's also the question of, before you legally adopt a child, whether you're going to let that child be known as the surname that you intend to give them. Now, this will of course be down to a social worker's decision as well, not yours just on your own. But we've known of couples that have been able to go ahead and have the name that they are going to be adopting into known as into the new school that they move into, so that they don't start school or go into a new school with one surname that they have to learn to write or to remember, and then partway through they change to a different surname, and then they've got to write this and remember this as well. So it's a conversation to be had with social workers. It's something to think about. It's a conversation with the child if they're old enough to understand what you're trying to say to them. In our situation, we did have our boys that went for adoption that didn't work out, and unfortunately in that situation they were given a known as name before they were actually adopted. So our sons ended up with their birth family name, they ended up with adoption name that failed, which they had to unlearn, and then they ended up with our name. That was very, very challenging to two little boys that have developmental needs as well. However, it is worth thinking about that it might be worth taking a name as known as. So between the ages of 5 and 11, children they're not developing as quickly as the under 5s, but they are beginning to realise there's a world around them, there's a world out there where lots of things happen, and that people have differing opinions, and where things happen other than what's in their home. I think when children are younger, their experience of what's happening in the home is their experience, but children that are 5 to 11, they want to explore more. You hope they want to explore more, because that is going to foster independence as a teenager. They want to know what people do in their family homes. They want to know what people do in the world. And of course, this is really exciting. So it's a really exciting age to bring other faiths, cultures, a worldview to your children and give them different experiences of trips and outings and things. Now, this is great, but of course, this can also challenge the child's identity around this time. It can cause them a few issues around who they are. Of course, they're beginning to think about, is their identity connected with their birth family? Is it connected with you? Is it connected with a foster family? If you're foster carers, is it an identity with you that's ever going to last, or is there going to be a new one? Identity, I think, is growing. The questions around identity is growing during this age group. That's very, very challenging. It can cause a lot of upset. But of course, it's an opportunity for you to put some more foundation work in that may not have been there before. They may not have been able to be there before. It's an opportunity for you to give them some grounding, some understanding of your love and your acceptance of them, who, no matter what they are or who they want to be. It's opportunities to discuss some more difficult issues with them. You have to go with caution. I think you have to go with caution because a lot of adopted or foster children have developmental issues, and they're not often ready to discuss some of the meatier topics that perhaps children who have not had childhood trauma are able to do. And so you need to be cautious. You need to have a little bit of protection for them. I mean, we found sometimes at school they're being exposed to stuff they're not yet ready for. You might sort of think yourself being overprotected, but you know your child. I say this in so many of my videos. You know your child, and so if you think a subject that's being explored at school is not suitable for whatever reason, I could give you so many examples, but for whatever reason, then it's your job to pull it back until you think they are ready, and they will be ready someday, but it's your job to pull it back. Your children are learning a lot more social skills because they have to. They're being exposed to school, they're interacting more with other people, and they're learning that they have to share. There's always give and take, and our children struggle with this a lot. One in particular struggles with this a lot, and so it's good. It's good because they are being molded to understand how society works and what's acceptable behaviour and what isn't. But of course, it's going to bring its challenges. I'm sure you realise I'm going to say this, because friendships are a big challenge for fostered and adopted children. I mean, of course, I'm not saying for every one of them. I'm just saying it really can be. And friendships can be cruel. Children can be cruel. Friendships come and go, and the sense of loss and trauma can be reinvented within the child. So stuff that they've experienced when they're younger of rejection and loss and suffering can be brought to the forefront if a particularly good friend just turns their back on them and goes with another friend. And we've found that our children really latch on to one person at a time. They find it really hard to understand that you can share affection, you can share love, and they really want that one person for them all the time. And of course, friends do not always function in the same way as them. They may want several friendships, and so it's helping your child to understand and navigate the whole friendship thing. It's encouraging them to have friendships into the home so that people can see how they live, encouraging them to go into other children's homes to see how they live, and gradually building this up. Now again, it's something you may have to pull back if things go wrong. I know that loads of adopters have reached out to me and said that their children struggle with friendships and get very upset around it, and I completely share that. We have that issue all the time. It's not a reason to not expose them to friendships. It's not a reason to stop them trying some things out and activities out with friends. So one of the big issues that we have in a way is our children compare what they have, material possessions. I would say that our boys are quite materialistic. I don't know whether it's because they had a really difficult start around these things. I don't know whether it's because they've got used to gratifying themselves with material things. I'm not really sure. But what I will say, and I think this was the case even with my birth children, because we've had 5 birth children, is that they will compare themselves a lot. I find that they always think somebody has more than them. They always think somebody has better than them. And I'm sure this is across the board with most children in the Western world. They just feel that there's always more to be had. And this is such a balancing act to have. They need enough to feel that they're not being separated out from their friendship groups, but they need to understand the value of money, and they need to understand that material goods are not necessarily going to satisfy them. They're not necessarily going to make them feel better. Boundary pushing happens with any fostered or adopted child. They get to the point where they want something more, and they want to see if you will agree to it. They don't necessarily know what's best for them. And boundary pushing is something that you have to be really firm over. So it's very much part of therapeutic parenting, is to make sure that the boundaries are there and that you stick to them. And one of the things that these older children might do, I mean, it's not to say that early years children don't push boundaries, they definitely do, but it's a slightly different thing in the way that they don't have the awareness that a 5 to 11-year-old would have, that if you gave into that boundary, that they will come back and try something more and something new and something different. I think that children of this age are quite good at wearing you down because they can keep asking, and also we find that they'll play one of us off against the other. So they'll ask for something and they'll go to somebody else. If they didn't get it from the first one, they'll go to the other one. So my husband and I often find that we're kind of checking with each other whether we agreed for something. And I find that, like, as parents, you can't agree on everything. So I might say yes to something and my husband might say no, and the other way around. But again, really important that you know how you feel about certain things. So if you feel that there needs to be a certain level of screen time, a certain amount of dinner eaten before treats, or whatever it is, you need to stick with it. Sometimes you can take the foot off the pedal as such if you're on holiday, or you're just wanting to relax things off and you've agreed together to do that, or you've agreed in your mind to do that. But actually, do not let your child rule the roost. Do not let your child be the adult. Be the parent and say no when you want to, and stick to it. We have homework for our boys. We didn't have so much when they were in what we call primary school, and they're a little bit older now. But if you are in any country, you may find that given work to do at home and stuff to do at home. And we have found that really challenging because they're developmentally behind they find school really tough and then they come home with more stuff to do. But I think this is the case not just around homework, but it's also a case around chores. Now, you may feel that children don't need to do chores, you may feel that children don't need to do homework, and I guess the way you feel is entirely up to you. But I feel that children need some responsibility, whatever that might be. So whether it be getting homework done when they come home from school, whether it be helping with the dishes, whether it be walking a pet, a dog. Not walking a pet, we're not going to walk a tortoise, but walking a dog. I feel they need some responsibility, and I feel if you don't start that from 5+, you're not going to be able to start that from 13+. Trust me on this. It's harder to get teenagers to do stuff than it is to get children of this age to do stuff. So if you want to build in chores into your life and you want to see your children taking responsibility for their bedrooms, for their washing, etc., this is something you really need to do now. This is similar to the boundary pushing. They won't want to do it unless they're one of these children who love to do that type of thing. They're out there, I guess. They won't really want to do it. They'll want to spend their time in their way. But I feel that part of growing up is to appreciate that the home is not just run by magic fairies. The home needs work. It needs people putting stuff in the washing machine. It needs stuff doing. So if you want to do it, get that in place at this age group from as early as you possibly can. Just small stuff, a few things that they need to do throughout the week, and stick with it, a bit like the boundaries. You are more likely to see any developmental issues coming to the surface now. Now, it might be that when you adopted or when you fostered, you knew that the child you were taking into placement or into your home might well have developmental issues, but they're not yet diagnosed, that the assessments haven't yet happened, and there's a lot more work to do. And I think between the age of 5 and 11, if there is anything there that's going to cause them developmental issues, or they've got cognitive issues, speech and language delay, it's going to come to the fore during this time. Now, of course, what that's going to mean for you is lots of work with professionals, assessments, phone calls, things that are going to put into place what your child actually has and what they need to help them. And this can be a great thing in the sense that they're going to then get the help they need and you are going to know what you're dealing with. But the other side of that is obviously it takes time and it can be frustrating, and sometimes you have to be a real advocate to get through what you need to get through to get your child the help that they need. And sometimes you do really have to fight for this, which is a bit of a shocker. I always think when we're talking about the most vulnerable children, sometimes it's really hard to get your voice heard, but you may well have to fight for them. So I hope you've enjoyed that video on adopting or even fostering a slightly older child. I'll put a playlist on the end about ages of children for adopting, and I'll also put a video on there about explaining family to adopted children as well. I hope you've enjoyed watching Fly Little Birds, and I'll see you on my channel.